West Hollywood, California, an eclectic and vibrant neighborhood nestled in the heart of Los Angeles. Known for its electric nightlife, inclusive atmosphere, and thriving LGBTQ+ community, it's a place where dreams are pursued and identities are celebrated. Here, beneath the glow of neon signs and the hum of music drifting through the streets, life moves with a unique energy. It's a sanctuary for many, a space where people come to find themselves and belong. But even in the safest havens, shadows can stretch long and dark. In March 2015, the rhythm of West Hollywood was disrupted by an event so shocking, so incomprehensible, that it left an indelible mark on the community and everyone involved. It wasn't just the nature of the crime, it was the chilling, macabre scene that awaited the detectives called to investigate. That spring evening, a neighbor's call to 911 sent officers rushing to an upscale apartment complex on North Kings Road. They had been trained for emergencies, for chaos and violence. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter. Seasoned detectives, hardened by years of working homicide, would later admit that the sight inside that apartment haunted them long after the case was closed. A man's life had ended in the most horrifying way imaginable. But this wasn't just any man. He was someone admired, someone cherished. His name would soon dominate headlines, his tragic story sparking debates, questions, and outrage. Who could have committed such a heinous act? And, perhaps more disturbingly, why? The crime scene was more than a place where life had been taken. It was a tableau of unimaginable violence, the kind that defies explanation. Blood stained the walls, the furniture, a chaotic narrative written in panic and pain. The investigators found themselves standing in silence, trying to make sense of the horror before them. The brutality was not just physical but psychological, as if the perpetrator had been driven by something far beyond anger or jealousy. What drives a person to commit an act so grotesque that it leaves even hardened professionals stunned? What secrets did this seemingly ordinary apartment hold? And how did the relationship between two lovers, once filled with promises of forever, descend into something this horrific? The questions were immediate and unrelenting. Who was this victim whose life had been violently stolen, and who was the person capable of such extreme cruelty? As detectives pieced together the evidence, the answers they uncovered would shock everyone: friends, family, and even the officers themselves. But those answers wouldn't come easily. Beneath the surface of what seemed like a tragic crime of passion lay deeper, more complex truths about human vulnerability, mental instability, and the fragile nature of trust. The story that would unravel in the months to follow wasn't just about murder. It was about the hidden layers of a relationship, the weight of unspoken struggles, and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. As the investigation unfolded, the nation watched horrified, yet unable to look away. How does a seemingly loving relationship turn into a nightmare? What happened in the moments leading up to the crime? And, most importantly, could it have been prevented? This isn't just another crime story. It's a tale of love and betrayal, of pain and loss. It's a reminder that even in the brightest of places, darkness can find its way in. And for the detectives who worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victim, this case would remain one of the most unforgettable of their careers. In this video, we delve into a story that's as haunting as it is heartbreaking. A story that left a community reeling and a family shattered. A story that asks not just what happened, but why it happened, and how it could have spiraled so far out of control. The truth behind this crime is as devastating as it is bewildering. And as we journey through the life, love, and ultimate tragedy of the individuals involved, one thing becomes clear. The scars of this case extend far beyond the crime scene. They leave a lasting imprint on everyone who dared to ask the burning question, how could this happen? Prepare yourself for a story that will challenge what you think you know about love, trust, and the human psyche. This is the tale of a crime that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. A case that truly left them saying, "We've never seen anything like this before." Dr. Kirtland Marr was the kind of person you could never forget. Born in 1980 in San Francisco, he grew up in a modest but tightly knit family. His parents, immigrants from Hong Kong, worked tirelessly to provide a better life for their children. They instilled in Kirtland a deep sense of responsibility, compassion, and the value of hard work, qualities that shaped him into the remarkable man he would become. Even as a child, Kirtland stood out, not for being loud or seeking attention, but for his quiet brilliance and a natural empathy that set him apart. Teachers would tell his parents, "He's not just smart, he's kind, thoughtful, and wise beyond his years." He was the kid who stayed after school to help classmates struggling with their lessons, or who spent his weekends volunteering at local shelters. His dreams of becoming a doctor began early. On one of his childhood visits to a pediatrician, he watched in awe as the doctor calmly reassured his worried parents. The mix of science and compassion fascinated him, and from that moment, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. In high school, Kirtland excelled in academics, particularly in math and science, but it wasn't just his intelligence that set him apart. He had an uncanny ability to connect with people, making them feel seen and understood. It was no surprise when he graduated as valedictorian and secured a full scholarship to a prestigious university. Medical school was a test of endurance, but Kirtland thrived. While his peers often burned out under the relentless pressure, he seemed to find strength in the challenge. His professors praised him not just for his technical skills, but for his unwavering composure in the face of high-stakes situations. He chose emergency medicine, a field that required quick thinking, steady hands, and an ability to comfort patients in their most vulnerable moments. It was a career that perfectly matched his talents and temperament. By his early 30s, Kirtland had become a respected physician at a busy Los Angeles hospital. His colleagues admired his sharp instincts and ability to remain calm under pressure. They often remarked, "When Kirtland is on shift, you know everything will be handled." Patients adored him too, for his gentle bedside manner and genuine concern. He wasn't the kind of doctor who treated symptoms, he treated people. Despite his demanding career, Kirtland made time for his family and close friends. He was a devoted son, calling his parents regularly and visiting them whenever he could. His siblings, who looked up to him as both a role model and a confidant, described him as the glue that held the family together. Friends often said that being around Kirtland felt like being in the presence of someone truly extraordinary. He could light up a room with his warm smile, offer comfort with just a few words, and make even the toughest days feel manageable. But for all his successes and the love he shared with those around him, Kirtland faced challenges that few could see. The demands of his career left little room for a personal life, and while he cherished his relationships with family and friends, there was always an underlying loneliness. Love, in particular, had proven elusive. Balancing a high-stakes job with his emotional needs wasn't easy. Dating often felt like an impossible task, as few could truly understand the pressures he faced. Yet he remained optimistic, believing that one day he would find someone who could share his life, someone who could see beyond his title and appreciate the man he was at his core. Friends would later recall how he longed for the same kind of love and connection he so freely gave to others. Beneath his calm and composed exterior was a man who craved understanding, partnership, and a sense of home. What made Kirtland unique wasn't just his accomplishments or his intelligence, it was his humanity. He was the kind of person who gave more than he took, who listened more than he spoke. He was driven by a deep desire to make the world better, whether through his work, his relationships, or his simple acts of kindness. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. For someone who had spent his life healing others, the tragedy that would soon befall him was unthinkable. The choices and events that followed would forever change the lives of those who knew him and leave a community grappling with a loss they could barely comprehend. The story of Kirtland Ma is one of brilliance, compassion, and quiet strength, but it is also a story of vulnerability, of the unseen struggles that even the brightest among us carry. What happened to him would not only shock those who knew him, but also raise questions about the fragility of trust and the unpredictability of fate. In 2013, Kirtland Ma's carefully constructed world shifted when he met Andre Davids. At a local charity event in Los Angeles, their paths crossed for the first time. Andre was unlike anyone Kirtland had met before, a whirlwind of energy and charisma, with an effortless charm that made him the center of attention wherever he went. He was a freelance graphic designer and self-proclaimed artist, who lived for spontaneity and creativity. To those who knew Kirtland, Andrei seemed like the perfect counterbalance to his structured, focused life. Andrei had a way of making people feel special, and Kirtland was no exception. From the moment they met, Andrei's warmth and enthusiasm were magnetic. He complimented Kirtland's intelligence and admired his dedication to his work, qualities that Andrei found inspiring. In turn, Kirtland was drawn to Andrei's adventurous spirit and passion for the arts, which brought a vibrant unpredictability to his otherwise methodical existence. Their relationship began quickly, and for a time it felt like a perfect match. Friends and colleagues saw a new side of Kirtland, one that was lighter, more carefree. He and Andrei attended events together, shared laughter over late-night dinners, and seemed genuinely happy. It was refreshing to see Kirtland, who was so often consumed by his work, find someone who brought a sense of balance to his life. Andrei's personality was captivating. He had a natural ability to charm everyone in the room, turning even mundane conversations into memorable experiences. He introduced Kirtland to a world of art galleries, music festivals, and impromptu road trips, things Kirtland had rarely had time for before. For someone who had spent years focusing solely on his career, this newfound freedom was exhilarating. But as the months passed, cracks began to form beneath the surface of their seemingly happy relationship. While Andrei's charm and creativity were undeniable, so too were his insecurities. He often felt overshadowed by Kirtland's success and began to question his place in Kirtland's world. These insecurities manifested as jealousy, and small disagreements between the couple began to escalate into larger arguments. Andrei would occasionally accuse Kirtland of prioritizing his work over their relationship or of spending too much time with friends and colleagues. At first, Kirtland dismissed these moments as growing pains, adjustments that every couple faces. He believed that with time and patience they could overcome these issues together. But Andrei's moods became increasingly volatile, shifting from affection to anger in ways that left Kirtland unsure of how to respond. Friends began to notice changes in Kirtland. He still smiled, still exuded the warmth and kindness he was known for, but there was a subtle wariness about him. Those closest to him could see that he was carrying the weight of the relationship on his shoulders, trying to keep the peace while managing his demanding career. When asked about Andrei, Kirtland would speak lovingly, but there was often a hint of hesitation, a fleeting moment where his eyes would lower as if he were holding something back. By early 2015, the strain had become undeniable. Kirtland, who had always approached challenges with logic and empathy, found himself questioning the future of his relationship. Despite his deep affection for Andrei, he confided in a close friend that he was considering ending things. "I care about him," he admitted one evening over coffee, "but I don't think we bring out the best in each other anymore. It's not healthy for either of us." For Kirtland, this wasn't an easy decision. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in working through struggles rather than walking away at the first sign of trouble. But he also recognized that their relationship had become toxic. The arguments were draining, the jealousy suffocating, and the emotional toll was beginning to affect him in ways he could no longer ignore. Still, breaking things off with Andrei wasn't something he approached lightly. He worried about how Andrei would take the news, knowing how deeply Andrei struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He wanted to find a way to let him down gently, to minimize the hurt as much as possible. Kirtland was a healer at heart, and even in this deeply personal moment, he couldn't abandon his instinct to protect others. But Andrei's insecurities ran deeper than Kirtland realized, and the prospect of losing him would trigger something far more dangerous than hurt feelings. Friends who later reflected on this time would recall that Andrei's behavior had become increasingly erratic. Frequent mood swings, cryptic comments about not being able to live without Kirtland, and an obsessive need for reassurance. What began as a love story filled with laughter and promise was now teetering on the edge of something darker. While Kirtland was preparing to make a difficult but necessary choice, Andrei was sinking into a place of desperation. By March 2015, those closest to Kirtland noticed a shift in his demeanor. He seemed quieter, more reserved, as if something heavy was weighing on his mind. He spoke less frequently about Andrei and more often about needing time to focus on himself. What no one could have predicted was how swiftly everything would unravel. and the devastating consequences that would follow. Kirtland's compassionate nature and his belief in the goodness of others had always been his strengths, but in this instance, they may have blinded him to the true depths of Andrei's turmoil. What came next would shock not only those who knew him, but also the detectives who would later uncover the full extent of what had transpired. The decisions and events that unfolded over those final weeks would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved and raise questions that still haunt those who remember him. March 28, 2015, started like any other Saturday night in West Hollywood. The streets buzzed with life, bars and restaurants filled with laughter, music spilling onto the sidewalks, and friends gathering for another memorable weekend. It was a city that prided itself on its vibrancy and openness, a place where many found solace and freedom. But there was more to excellence than just a number on a list, and some had come to the park for the first time in real life. But within the walls of a modest apartment on North Kings Road, a different kind of night was taking shape, one that would cast a shadow over the community for years to come. Kirtland Ma, by all accounts, had been grappling with a difficult decision. The thought of ending his relationship with Andre Davids weighed heavily on him. He had spent weeks trying to summon the courage to have the conversation, knowing it would be emotionally charged. Despite Andre's charm and their shared moments of happiness, the relationship had become toxic. Kirtland felt drained, and his friends had urged him to prioritize his well-being. But ending things with Andre wasn't straightforward. Kirtland was aware of Andre's insecurities and emotional volatility. He had seen flashes of it before: Andre's jealousy, the heated arguments, the unpredictable mood swings. While Andre had always apologized afterward, promising to change, the cycle continued. It wasn't in Kirtland's nature to give up on someone, but he knew he couldn't continue living like this. That evening, neighbors reported hearing raised voices coming from the apartment. It wasn't unusual for the couple to argue, but this time the tone was different. There was an intensity, a rawness, that seemed to cut through the usual din of the bustling neighborhood. Inside the apartment, Kirtland had finally broached the subject. He told Andre that their relationship wasn't working, that he thought they needed to go their separate ways. For Kirtland, it was a painful but necessary step toward regaining control of his life. But for Andre, it was a devastating blow. Andre's reaction was immediate and volatile. The man who had once charmed Kirtland with his charisma now unleashed a torrent of anger and despair. He accused Kirtland of betrayal, of not trying hard enough to make their relationship work. His voice echoed through the small apartment, growing louder, more erratic with every word. What happened next defied comprehension. Detectives later pieced together the grim sequence of events based on the evidence they found. As the argument escalated, Andre's emotions spiraled out of control. Consumed by rage and desperation, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen. What began as a heated conversation turned into an eruption of violence so brutal that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand it. Andre stabbed Kirtland repeatedly, each thrust of the blade a manifestation of his uncontrollable fury. The attack was relentless, leaving Kirtland with over 40 stab wounds. Blood spattered the walls and pooled on the floor, painting a harrowing picture of the chaos that had unfolded. But the violence didn't end there. What Andre did next shocked even the most experienced detectives. In a series of grotesque and incomprehensible acts, he disemboweled Kirtland. Some of his organs were placed in his mouth, a detail that spoke to a level of rage and disturbance far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As if that weren't horrifying enough, investigators found empty pill bottles stuffed into Kirtland's body cavity, a chilling act that defied explanation. The scene was both gruesome and deeply unsettling. It wasn't just the physical evidence of violence that disturbed the investigators, it was the psychological implications. What could drive someone to commit such acts? What was going through Andre's mind in those moments? By the time the neighbors called the police, the apartment had fallen eerily silent. Officers arrived to find Andre in the bathroom, slumped on the floor. He appeared dazed, having ingested a significant amount of pills in what was believed to be an attempted suicide. His clothes were soaked with blood, his hands trembling as he sat amidst the aftermath of his actions. In the living room lay Kirtland's lifeless body, surrounded by the haunting evidence of the violence that had occurred. For the officers on the scene, it was a moment they would never forget. The brutality, the sheer savagery of the act, left even the most hardened among them shaken. Detectives who later examined the scene described it as one of the most disturbing cases they had ever encountered. It wasn't just the level of violence, it was the deeply personal and symbolic nature of Andrei's actions. The placement of the organs, the use of the pill bottles, these were acts that hinted at a psychological unraveling that was as tragic as it was horrifying. In the aftermath, questions loomed large. What had driven Andrei to this point? Was it pure rage, a moment of blind fury, or was there something deeper, a psychological break that had been building long before that fateful night? As investigators delved into the case, they uncovered a web of emotional turmoil, unresolved conflicts, and warning signs that had gone unnoticed. The tragedy of Kirtland Marr's death wasn't just in the loss of a brilliant, compassionate man. It was in the senselessness of the act, the stark contrast between the love they once shared and the violence that ended it. For those who knew Kirtland, the pain of his loss was compounded by the questions that would haunt them forever. The events of that night marked the beginning of a complex and harrowing investigation, one that would push detectives to their limits and reveal the darkest corners of the human psyche. But even as they worked tirelessly to piece together the truth, one question lingered. How did it come to this? Andrei Davids was immediately taken into custody on that grim March night, still visibly under the influence of the pills he had ingested. Officers described his state as distant, his eyes unfocused, his responses sluggish and barely coherent. He offered no explanation, no denial, no confession, just a haunting vacancy that only deepened the unsettling nature of the crime. Duvier yourself, d'Envilaison? Detectives would later note that Andrei seemed detached, as though the enormity of what had just occurred had yet to register in his mind. The crime scene was a tableau of unimaginable violence. The apartment, which once bore traces of their shared life, a pair of framed photos, mismatched coffee mugs, the plans Kirtland meticulously cared for, was now awash in chaos. Blood, smeared across the walls and floor, told the story of a frenzied, uncontrollable attack. Investigators worked methodically, documenting every detail: the knife discarded near the kitchen, the pill bottles, and the horrifying arrangement of evidence that spoke to a level of psychological disturbance they rarely encountered. Neighbors watched from behind their blinds and doorways as Andrei was escorted out in handcuffs. The whispers began almost immediately. How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such an act? Had anyone noticed anything unusual in the days leading up to the tragedy? And most haunting of all, why had no one been able to stop it? For the detectives, this wasn't just a case of homicide. It was a puzzle, layered with emotional and psychological complexities. The brutality of the act demanded answers, and those answers wouldn't come easily. They began their work with the most immediate task: piecing together a timeline of events leading up to that fateful night. Interviews with neighbors provided fragments of insight. Some recalled hearing raised voices earlier in the evening, while others reported a loud crash followed by a chilling silence. One neighbor mentioned seeing Andrei pacing the hallway days before, muttering to himself. At the time, they had chalked it up to stress, but in hindsight, it painted a picture of a man teetering on the edge. As investigators dug deeper, they reached out to Kirtland's friends and family, who were now in the throes of grief. They described Kirtland as a man who rarely spoke ill of others, even when he had every reason to. While he had hinted at struggles in his relationship with Andrei, he had downplayed the severity of those issues, choosing instead to focus on finding solutions rather than dwelling on the problems. Friends close to Kirtland revered that he had confided in them about Andrei's mood swings and jealousy. He wanted to help him, one friend said tearfully during an interview. That was just who Kirtland was. He believed in people, even when it was hard. Andrei's acquaintances, on the other hand, painted a different picture. While many described him as charismatic and talented, they also spoke of his insecurities and unpredictable temperament. He was known for his passionate outbursts, which, though often verbal, left those around him on edge. Some mentioned moments where his jealousy toward Kirtland's demanding career and social circle had led to heated arguments. The investigators also turned their attention to Andre's past. What they uncovered added a layer of complexity to the case. Andre had grown up in a turbulent household, marked by instability and emotional neglect. As an adult, he had pursued a career in the arts, a field that gave him an outlet for his creativity, but also amplified his insecurities. He struggled to find consistent work, often comparing himself to Kirtland's steady success in medicine. Psychological evaluations later suggested that Andre's fragile sense of self-worth may have been a driving force behind his actions. For years, he had relied on Kirtland's stability as an anchor. When that anchor threatened to slip away, it triggered something deep and primal within him. A fear of abandonment so overwhelming that it exploded into violence. Meanwhile, as the investigation unfolded, the media descended on the case. Headlines splashed across newspapers and television screens. Brutal West Hollywood murder shocks community, respected doctor killed in gruesome crime, and jealous rage, the tragic end of Kirtland Ma. The sensational nature of the crime captivated public attention, but for those closest to the case, it was a painful reminder of the lives irrevocably altered by the tragedy. Detectives were meticulous in building their case. Every piece of evidence, from the blood patterns to the pill bottles, was analyzed and catalogued. Forensic specialists worked to determine the sequence of events, hoping to shed light on Andre's state of mind during the attack. Psychiatric experts were brought in to assess Andre's behavior, examining whether his actions were premeditated or the result of an emotional breakdown. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, one thing became clear. This was not just a crime of passion. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of unresolved tension, unchecked emotions, and a relationship that had veered into dangerous territory. For Kirtland's loved ones, the revelations were both painful and cathartic. They struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the horrifying circumstances of his death. "We want people to remember Kirtland for the life he lived, not the way he died," his sister said in a tearful statement to the press. Andre's arrest marked the beginning of a legal battle that promised to be as emotionally charged as the crime itself. As he sat in a holding cell, awaiting his first court appearance, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. His silence during those initial days spoke volumes. What, if anything, would he say when his time came to face the investigation was far from over. Detectives knew they still had questions to answer, motives to untangle, and a courtroom to prepare for. But as they looked at the evidence before them, one question lingered. Could anything have been done to prevent this tragedy? And how could they ensure that justice would be served for a life so cruelly taken? The story of Kirtland Ma and Andre Davids was no longer just about a single act of violence. It had become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of ignoring the warning signs. By January 2016, the trial of Andre Davids began, capturing widespread attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and curious onlookers, all eager to hear the details of the case that had shocked an entire community. For Kirtland's loved ones, it was a painful ordeal. Each day a reopening of wounds that had barely begun to heal. Prosecutors began their case with precision, presenting the chilling evidence in stark detail. Photographs from the crime scene, forensic reports, and the coroner's findings painted a harrowing picture. The prosecutor described the night of March 28, 2015 as one of unimaginable brutality, arguing that Andre's actions were not impulsive but deliberate and calculated. This wasn't a crime of passion, the lead prosecutor stated. It was a crime of control. Andre Davids knew he was losing the one thing he couldn't bear to lose, Kirtland Ma's love. And rather than let him go, he chose to destroy him. To support their argument, they presented text messages and emails recovered from Kirtland's phone. These messages revealed a pattern of escalating tension in the months leading up to the murder. Andre's words were often laced with jealousy and paranoia, accusing Kirtland of prioritizing his career and friends over their relationship. One particularly chilling message read, "If you leave me, I'll have nothing left. Don't push me to the edge, Kirtland. The defense, however, painted a starkly different picture. Their strategy revolved around Andrei's mental health. His lead attorney argued that Andrei had suffered from undiagnosed and untreated psychological issues for years. They introduced medical records indicating periods of depression and anxiety, as well as testimony from mental health professionals who had evaluated Andrei after the arrest. In publicity, their star witness, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that Andrei had experienced a psychotic break on the night of the murder. His actions were not premeditated, the psychiatrist explained. They were the result of a mind pushed to its breaking point, a mind gripped by fear, paranoia, and an inability to process emotional pain. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a theater of raw emotion. Friends and family of both Kirtland and Andrei took the stand, their testimonies weaving together a narrative of love, conflict, and tragedy. Kirtland's sister, Emily, delivered one of the most heart-wrenching testimonies. Struggling to hold back tears, she described her brother as a man of boundless compassion. He had this ability to make you feel seen, no matter who you were, she said. He dedicated his life to helping people, and he believed in the goodness of others, even when they didn't deserve it. I can't stop thinking about how scared he must have been in those final moments. Andrei's defense team countered with testimonies from his close friends and former colleagues, who described a man deeply troubled but not inherently violent. Andrei was always sensitive, one friend said. He could be intense, sure, but he wasn't a monster. He needed help, and he didn't get it. The prosecution, however, remained steadfast. They argued that Andrei's mental health issues, while significant, did not absolve him of responsibility. Plenty of people struggle with mental health challenges, the prosecutor stated during closing arguments. But they don't resort to violence. Andrei Davids made a choice that robbed the world of an extraordinary man. Throughout the trial, Andrei sat quietly at the defense table, his expression unreadable. Occasionally, he would glance at the witnesses or the evidence displayed on the screens, but for the most part, he remained still. His lack of visible emotion became a point of contention in the courtroom, with some interpreting it as guilt and others as further evidence of his psychological detachment. The trial lasted for weeks, each day bringing new revelations that deepened the complexity of the case. At one point, the defense introduced a handwritten letter Andrei had penned while in custody. In it, he expressed deep remorse for his actions, though his words were fragmented and disjointed. "I don't know how to explain what happened," he wrote. "I loved Kirtland, but something inside me snapped. I wish I could take it all back. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The letter became a focal point of the trial. To the defense, it was proof of Andrei's remorse and mental instability. To the prosecution, it was a calculated attempt to garner sympathy. As the trial drew to a close, both sides delivered impassioned closing arguments. The prosecution urged the jury to focus on the facts, the premeditation, the brutality, and the irreparable harm caused to Kirtland's loved ones. The defense implored the jury to consider Andrei's mental state and the role it played in the tragedy. The jury deliberated for 3 days, their decision weighed down by the gravity of the case. The community anxiously awaited the verdict, each day bringing a mix of hope, fear, and speculation. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom fell silent. Andrei Davids stood as the foreperson read the verdict, his hands trembling slightly. What followed would send ripples through the community and reignite debates about justice, mental health, and the limits of forgiveness. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the moment palpable. The judge, a stern figure, briefly explained the reasoning behind the decision. While the jury had acknowledged Andrei's struggles with mental health, they had also found that the brutality of the murder and his actions after the crime were not those of a person who had lost all sense of reality. The post-crime behavior, his attempt to take his own life, followed by his incoherent statements, had only served to complicate the narrative, casting doubt on the defense's claim that Andrei was entirely detached from his actions. Kirtland's family remained stoic, though the pain was visible in their eyes. His mother, father, and siblings were present, their faces tight with grief. To them, this verdict was a bittersweet reminder of the life that had been stolen from them. No sentence, no matter how severe, could ever replace the son, brother, and friend they had lost. Kirtland had been a man who lived to help others, and the finality of his death seemed too cruel for someone who had given so much. The defense, while acknowledging the verdict, continued to argue that Andre's actions were the result of a mind in crisis. His attorneys requested leniency, citing his ongoing struggles with untreated mental illness and the effects of the drugs he had ingested that night. But the judge remained unmoved by the plea. Andre Davids was sentenced to 12 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. While this sentence spared him from a potential life sentence, it still marked a significant consequence for the crime he had committed. Yet for Kirtland's family, the number of years didn't matter. No number could ever bring Kirtland back. No prison term could undo the pain of losing him in such a brutal and senseless way. As the gavel came down, a sense of finality washed over the courtroom. But for those closest to Kirtland, the story didn't end there. There would be no true closure for them. Andre's time in prison would be served, but the loss of Kirtland's kind and brilliant spirit would remain an open wound. Kirtland's brother, Wayland Marr, stood up, his voice trembling with emotion. He addressed Andre directly, his words cutting through the air with a rawness that left no doubt about the depth of his pain. "When anyone, including your family, looks at you, the first thing they will see is a murderer," Wayland said. "You will never escape the evil you carry inside of you, and people will know." His words hung in the air, an accusation, a plea, and a declaration of the irrevocable pain caused by Andre's actions. The victim's family, though devastated, found strength in their unity. They knew that while Kirtland could never be replaced, his legacy could live on in the lives he had touched, through the patients he had healed, the friends he had supported, and the countless people who remembered him for his selflessness and compassion. But as much as the community struggled with these questions, the one undeniable truth remained. The life of Dr. Kirtland Marr had been violently and senselessly taken, and his family and friends were left to pick up the pieces of their broken hearts. Background music shifts to a softer, reflective tone. As Andre was escorted out of the courtroom, Kirtland's family remained behind, holding on to one another for support. Though their grief was immense, there was a sense of resilience among them. They had lost someone irreplaceable, but they also knew that his legacy would not be forgotten. The community would remember Kirtland, not for the horrific way in which his life ended, but for the many lives he had touched and the kindness he had shown to all who knew him. Now, as we reflect on the aftermath of this tragedy, it's a reminder of the importance of recognizing the warning signs of mental health struggles and seeking help before it's too late. We must remember that every person has a story, and sometimes the pain they carry can lead to outcomes no one could have predicted. But this is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a call to action, a call to ensure that we support each other, that we notice when something isn't right, and that we fight against the silence that too often surrounds mental health issues. As we close Kirtland Marr's story, we ask, what more can we do as a society to prevent such tragedies from happening again? How can we ensure that people who are struggling receive the care they need before it's too late? These are questions we must all ask ourselves as we move forward. If you believe that mental health should never be ignored, if you think that we can do better in supporting those who need help, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you believe that we need to raise more awareness about the impact of untreated mental illness, hit that subscribe button. Only those who believe that change isn't necessary will ignore the need for awareness. We owe it to Kirtland and to ourselves to ensure that his death was not in vain.